My fiancé Liam's hand tightened on my arm, his voice a low whisper that barely carried over the rustle of old newspapers. "Someone's at the door, Emma." I looked up from the dusty box of my grandmother's photographs, my heart giving a little lurch. We weren't expecting anyone. My family had my cell number, and after the last screaming match over the inheritance, they weren't exactly in the habit of making polite house calls. A sharp, authoritative rap echoed through the quiet house, making me jump. It wasn't a friendly knock. Liam, ever the calm one, moved toward the front hall. I heard the click of the lock, the creak of the old oak door, and then voices. Unfamiliar, male voices, and one that was achingly familiar, though pitched with a manufactured tremor of distress. Before I continue the story, please subscribe. I need to reach 1,000 subscribers so I can keep bringing you stories like this every day. It's just one click for you, but it means a lot to me. It was my Aunt Carol. And 5 hours later, after my world had been systematically dismantled and rebuilt, I finally understood just how deep the rot in my family went. It all started, as these things so often do, with a death. My grandmother, the only real port in my family's perpetual storm, passed away after a long illness. For the last 2 years of her life, I was the one who managed her care. I coordinated doctor's appointments, I did her grocery shopping, I sat with her through the long nights when her mind started to wander. My younger sister, Chloe, the designated golden child, was far too busy building her brand as a lifestyle influencer to be bothered with the grim realities of aging. My parents? They were busy enabling her, funding her whimsical life, and telling anyone who would listen how proud they were of their creative, free-spirited daughter. They'd call my grandmother once a week, a stilted 5-minute conversation that always ended with them telling me to let them know if I needed anything, a hollow offer they never intended to make good on. When the will was read, the silence in the lawyer's office was thick enough to choke on. My grandmother had left the house, her sanctuary and mine, to me. She also left me all of her personal belongings, the accumulated treasures of a life well lived. To my parents and Chloe, she left a respectable, but not life-changing sum of money. The subtext was clear. She had provided for them financially, but her legacy, her home, was for the person who had actually been there. The explosion was immediate. Chloe's face, usually arranged in a carefully curated pout for her followers, contorted into a mask of pure rage. My mother began to sob, not from grief, but from a sense of thwarted entitlement. My father's jaw tightened, the little muscle pulsing in his cheek that always signaled an impending lecture on my selfishness. They cornered me before we even left the office, their voices a venomous chorus. Chloe claimed Grandma had promised her the antique vanity. My mother insisted the pearl necklace was meant for her. My father started talking about the house, how it wasn't practical for a single person, how it was a family asset. It was a full-scale assault, and I was the target. Desperate for an ally, for a single voice of reason, I called my Aunt Carol, my grandmother's younger sister. I laid out the whole ugly scene, my voice shaking with a mixture of grief and fury. Her response was a sigh, heavy and weary. "Oh, Emma," she'd said, her voice dripping with a kind of patronizing pity. "You know what they're like. I'm just too old to be getting involved in all this drama. You're the strong one, you always have been. You'll handle it." Being called the strong one in my family was not a compliment, it was a life sentence. It meant I was the one expected to absorb the shocks, to manage the crises, and to forgive the transgressions of others without ever being offered an apology. It was a role I was cast in from a very young age. I remembered being 7 and my sister Chloe, then 5, breaking our mother's favourite porcelain vase. When my mother came in and saw the glittering shards on the floor, Chloe immediately burst into tears and pointed a trembling finger at me. I was so stunned by the betrayal, I couldn't even speak. I took the punishment, grounded for a week, because Chloe was too sensitive to be yelled at. That was the first tile in a long mosaic of me being the designated shock absorber. When Chloe needed money for a photography class she'd abandoned after 2 weeks, my parents took it from the savings account they'd supposedly set up for both of our educations. When I questioned it, I was told I was being selfish and that I didn't support my sister's artistic dreams. The unspoken truth was that my dreams were considered less important, less valid. My desire to study veterinary medicine was practical, boring, Whereas Chloe's whims were exciting and full of potential, I learned to be self-sufficient out of necessity. I got a part-time job in high school, I applied for scholarships, and I put myself through college and vet tech school with a combination of loans and sheer grit. I was the reliable one, the one who always had her life together, but this reliability was a double-edged sword. It meant that whenever my parents or Chloe got into a financial bind, I was their first call. It started small, $100 to fix a flat tire, $200 for a sudden bill. But it escalated. The worst was when Chloe decided to launch her own line of artisanal candles. She needed $5,000 for supplies and website development. My parents, having already sunk thousands into her failed jewelry-making business and her short-lived career as a DJ, co-signed a loan for her, which she promptly defaulted on. The calls from the bank started coming to them, and in a panic, they called me. I was sitting in my tiny apartment, eating ramen noodles and studying for my board exams, when my mother called me, weeping. She told me the stress was going to kill my father, that Chloe was a wreck, and that if I didn't help, the family would be ruined. They didn't ask, they expected. They knew I had savings because I was good with money. I gave them the money, draining the account I had painstakingly built for a down payment on a car. They promised to pay me back. They never did. A month later, Chloe posted photos on social media from a luxury spa weekend. Her caption read, "Self-care is so important. Learning to invest in myself." I felt a cold, hard knot of resentment form in my stomach. That was my money, my self-denial, being rebranded as her enlightened self-investment. My fiancé, Liam, saw the dynamic with horrifying clarity from the very beginning. He called it the economy of dysfunction. I was the treasury, and everyone else was a reckless spender. He was the first person to ever tell me that no was a complete sentence. It was a lesson I was only just beginning to learn. The week after the will was read was a masterclass in emotional manipulation, and my family were the star professors. Their tactics shifted daily, a dizzying carousel of guilt, rage, and feigned affection. First came the direct assault. My phone buzzed constantly with texts from Chloe. They were a bizarre mix of vitriol and victimhood. One message would be a string of curses, calling me a thief and a vulture. The next would be a weepy paragraph about how she was just so heartbroken because Grandma had apparently promised her the grandfather clock in the hall, and every time she looked at her own bare wall, she was reminded of her loss. It was emotional whiplash. My parents opted for a more united front. They would call me together, my father laying down the law with his booming voice, while my mother provided a supporting chorus of sighs and sniffles. Their main argument was that I was tearing the family apart. According to them, the house and its contents were a shared family legacy, and by adhering to the will, I was disrespecting my grandmother's true wishes, which they, of course, were uniquely privy to. "Your grandmother was not in her right mind, Emma," my father declared one evening, his voice full of false authority. "She was sick, and you took advantage of her. She would have wanted Chloe to have the vanity. She would have wanted your mother to have her jewelry." It was a classic gaslighting technique. Rewrite history and declare my reality invalid. I tried to reason with them. I explained that Grandma and I had discussed her will at length, that she had been perfectly lucid, and that she had her own reasons for her decisions. This was a mistake. Presenting them with logic was like trying to put out a grease fire with water. It only made things worse. They twisted my words, accusing me of being cold and unfeeling. Then, when the anger didn't work, they switched to love bombing. My mother called me, her voice syrupy sweet. "We were just thinking, honey," she cooed. "Why don't we all get together for dinner? We can sort this out like a family. We love you, Emma. We just want what's fair." I saw the trap immediately. A family dinner would be an ambush. A 4-hour ordeal where I would be emotionally battered into submission. I declined politely, citing my busy schedule with work and having to start the process of sorting through my grandmother's estate. The sweetness vanished instantly. "I see," my mother said, her voice turning to ice. "So you're too busy for your own family now. I guess we know where we stand." During this onslaught, Aunt Carol remained my one hope for a neutral party. I called her again, updating her on the latest developments, hoping for a crumb of support. Her response was the same tired refrain. "Oh dear, it sounds just awful. I wish I could help, but my nerves can't take it. I'm too old for these squabbles. You just have to be the bigger person, Emma. Keep the peace. Her passivity was infuriating. It wasn't neutrality, it was a tacit endorsement of their behavior. By refusing to get involved, she was allowing the abuse to continue unchecked. She was another person telling me to lie down and be a doormat, to sacrifice my own well-being for the comfort of those who were actively harming me. Liam was my anchor through all of this. He would listen to me vent after each phone call, his expression a mixture of anger and concern. "They're trying to wear you down," he said, wrapping his arms around me. "It's a siege. They think if they just keep firing, you'll eventually surrender." He was right. That had been their strategy my entire life, and for my entire life it had worked. But something felt different this time. Grief had a way of crystallizing things, of burning away the fog of obligation and revealing the stark truth underneath. The truth was, my family's love was entirely conditional, and the conditions were no longer ones I was willing to meet. 2 weeks after the funeral, I took the first tentative steps into my new life by going to my grandmother's house alone. Liam had offered to come, but I needed to do this by myself. The house was exactly as she had left it, a perfect time capsule of her quiet, orderly existence. The air still held a faint scent of lavender and old books. Sunlight streamed through the lace curtains, illuminating dancing dust motes. For a moment, it was peaceful. I felt her presence everywhere, in the worn, floral armchair where she did her crosswords, in the collection of porcelain birds on the mantelpiece, in the stack of library books on her bedside table. This house wasn't just bricks and mortar, it was a testament to the one person in my family who had loved me unconditionally. My peaceful reconnaissance was short-lived. As I was standing in the kitchen, a key scraped in the front door lock. My heart leaped into my throat. My parents and Chloe had keys, a fact I had momentarily forgotten. The door swung open, and in they walked, as if they owned the place. Chloe's eyes immediately began scanning the rooms, a predatory glint in her gaze. My mother had a stack of empty cardboard boxes in her arms. My father had a roll of packing tape. They hadn't come to visit, they had come to claim their spoils. "Emma, there you are," my mother said, with a brittle smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We thought we'd come and help you get started. There's so much to do." Chloe breezed past me into the living room. "I'll just get the vanity out of the way first," she announced, as if this had all been agreed upon. "It's going to look so perfect in my filming room." I stood there, frozen for a second, a wave of disbelief washing over me. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. They had decided to simply bypass me, to walk in and take what they wanted, assuming I would just stand aside and let them. This was the moment. This was the pivot point. I could either revert to my old role as the family doormat, or I could finally stand up. A cold, calm anger settled over me. "No," I said. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the air like a razor. All three of them stopped and looked at me, their expressions a mixture of surprise and annoyance, like I was a faulty appliance that had suddenly started making an unexpected noise. "What did you say?" my father asked, his brow furrowed. "I said no," I repeated, my voice stronger this time. "You are not taking the vanity, or the jewelry, or anything else." The will was very clear. These things belong to me now. Chloe let out a scoff of derisive laughter. "Oh my God, you're actually serious. Emma, don't be ridiculous. We're your family." "My family who has been harassing me for 2 weeks, I countered. "My family who is trying to ignore our grandmother's last wishes. You are not helping me sort anything. You are here to take things that are not yours. You need to leave." The atmosphere in the room crackled with tension. My mother put the boxes down, her lips pressed into a thin, disapproving line. "I think you're forgetting yourself, young lady," she said. "We are your parents, and I am the executor of this estate," I shot back, emboldened by my own nerve. "And I am telling you to leave my house." I walked to the front door and held it open. For a long, tense moment, nobody moved. They just stared at me, their faces a gallery of indignation. Then, my father took a step forward, his face red with anger. "This is not over," he seethed. "Not by a long shot." They filed out, defeated and furious, and I slammed the door behind them, my hands shaking but my heart soaring. I had done it. I had held the line. That night, I had all the locks on the house changed. It felt like a declaration of independence. It was also, I would later realize, the act of aggression that would push my family to escalate their campaign in ways I could never have imagined. The week following the confrontation at the house was eerily quiet. The constant barrage of texts and calls ceased. It was a silence that was more unsettling than the noise. It was the calm before the storm, the deep breath a predator takes before it strikes. Liam, ever practical, urged me to document everything. Just in case, he said. So I did. I saved the abusive text messages from Chloe. I wrote down the dates and times of the phone calls from my parents, summarizing their attempts at manipulation and intimidation. It felt silly, like I was preparing for a war that would never come, but I trusted Liam's instincts. During this lull, I received a call from Aunt Carol. Her tone was different this time. It wasn't weary or dismissive. It was inquisitive. "I was just calling to see how you are, dear," she said. "Your mother told me you had a bit of a disagreement." A disagreement was a rather mild term for what had happened, but I let it slide. "I'm fine, Aunt Carol," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "I'm just trying to follow Grandma's wishes." "Of course, dear, of course," she said quickly. Then, her questions started, each one wrapped in a veneer of casual concern. "It must be such a big job, going through all of your grandmother's things. She was such a collector. I remember she had that beautiful set of silver cutlery, the one from her wedding. Is that still in the sideboard?" "Yes, it's there," I said, a little confused by the specificity of the question. "Oh, that's lovely," she mused. "And her jewelry box. I hope you're keeping that somewhere safe. Some of those pieces are quite valuable, you know." "I'm being very careful with everything," I assured her. The conversation continued like this for another 10 minutes. She asked about the grandfather clock, the collection of first edition books in my grandfather's study, and the porcelain doll collection my grandmother kept in a glass cabinet. Each question was a gentle, probing inquiry. At the time, I thought it was just the rambling of an old woman reminiscing. I saw it as a welcome change from the overt hostility of my parents and sister. I thought perhaps she was trying, in her own way, to connect with me over our shared memories of my grandmother. I now see it for what it was, a reconnaissance mission. She was gathering intelligence for the enemy, creating an inventory for their next attack. Liam was more suspicious. When I recounted the conversation to him that evening, he frowned. "That's weird," he said. "It sounds like she was fishing for information. Are you sure you can trust her?" "She's my aunt," I said, a little defensively. "She says she doesn't want to be involved." "Saying you're not involved and actually not being involved are two different things, Em," he warned. "Her actions are what matter. You for a detailed list of your grandmother's most valuable possessions feels calculated." I wanted to dismiss his concerns. I wanted to believe that at least one person in my extended family was on my side, or at least neutral. The idea that Aunt Carol, who had always seemed so benign, could be conspiring with my parents felt too much like a plot from a soap opera, but a seed of doubt had been planted. The quiet from the rest of the family broke a few days later, not with a phone call, but with a letter. It was from a lawyer. It was a formal, intimidating document, full of legal jargon, but the message was clear. My parents and sister were contesting the will. They were claiming undue influence, alleging that I had manipulated my grandmother in her final days to change her will in my favor. They were demanding a full accounting of the estate, and that all assets be frozen until the matter could be settled in court. I read the letter 3 times, my hands trembling. This was their new strategy. If they couldn't bully me into submission, they would try to crush me with legal fees and bureaucratic nightmares. They knew I didn't have the money to fight a prolonged court battle. It was a declaration of total war. And, as I stared at the lawyer's letterhead, a cold dread washed over me. This was far from over. This was just the beginning. The lawyer's letter was a gut punch, designed to paralyze me with fear and uncertainty. For a few hours, it worked. I paced my small apartment, the threatening words swirling in my head. Undue influence, legal action, frozen assets. It was a nightmare. They were trying to paint me as a monster, a greedy caregiver who had taken advantage of a vulnerable old woman. It was a grotesque inversion of the truth. My grandmother had been my everything, and the idea that they would defile her memory and my love for her to get their hands on a vanity and some jewelry filled me with a rage so profound it almost choked me. Liam, my rock, read the letter with a calm, analytical expression. He wasn't a lawyer, but he had a knack for seeing through bluster and intimidation. "This is a scare tactic," he said finally, folding the letter neatly. "They're betting you'll panic and give them what they want to make it go away." "Will it work?" I asked, my voice small. "I can't afford a legal battle." "We'll figure it out," he said, his confidence a balm on my frayed nerves. "First thing tomorrow, we find a lawyer who specializes in estate law. Many of them offer free consultations. We're not going to roll over, Em. Not this time." The next day, we found a lawyer named Mr. Davies, a kind, elderly man with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. I sat in his stuffy, book-lined office and told him everything. I told him about my role as my grandmother's caregiver, about my sister's entitlement, my parents' enablement, the harassment, the confrontation at the house, the strange call from my aunt, and finally the letter. I brought my binder of evidence, the saved text messages, the log of phone calls. Mr. Davies listened patiently, nodding occasionally. When I was finished, he looked at my folder of notes and gave me a small, approving smile. "You've done very well documenting all of this," he said. "This is exactly what we need." He explained that claims of undue influence are very difficult to prove, especially when there is a long-established history of one family member being the primary caregiver. He read a copy of the will and pointed out that my grandmother had included a specific clause, often called a no-contest clause. It stipulated that if any beneficiary formally contested the will and lost, they would forfeit their inheritance entirely. "Your parents and sister are taking a very big gamble," Mr. Davies explained. "They're assuming you'll cave under pressure. Our first step is to call their bluff." He drafted a response to their lawyer. It was a masterpiece of polite, professional defiance. It stated that I was the rightful executor and beneficiary, that I intended to carry out my grandmother's wishes to the letter, and that any attempt to formally contest the will in court would be met with a vigorous defense and the full enforcement of the no-contest clause. We sent the letter, and then we waited. The silence returned, but this time it felt different. It was the silence of a chess match, each side waiting for the other to make a move. The legal threat seemed to have pushed them back, at least for the moment. Buoyed by this small victory, Liam and I decided to begin the monumental task of sorting through my grandmother's house in earnest. We knew we needed to create a thorough inventory of the estate, not just for legal purposes, but for my own peace of mind. We decided to tackle one room at a time, starting with the attic. It was dusty and filled with forgotten treasures. We found old photo albums, my grandfather's military uniform, stacks of letters tied with faded ribbon. It was an emotional process, a journey through my family's history. As we worked, we talked. "Do you think they'll actually take it to court?" I asked Liam as I wiped the dust off an old rocking horse. "I don't know," he admitted, "but if they do, we'll be ready for them." "What they're doing, Emma, it's not about the money or the furniture. It's about control. They've been able to control you your entire life, and now you're taking that control away. It's driving them insane." He was right. Every box I packed, every decision I made about what to keep, what to donate, and what to throw away was an act of defiance. It was me, asserting my rightful place as the steward of my grandmother's legacy. I was no longer the family's compliant servant. I was the master of my own house, in every sense of the word. We spent the next several weekends working our way down from the attic. The process was slow and methodical. Liam, with his engineer's brain, created a detailed spreadsheet. We photographed every significant item, noting its condition and location. I felt like an archaeologist, carefully excavating the ruins of a life. Each object told a story. A chipped teacup brought back memories of afternoon tea with my grandmother. A well-loved cookbook, its pages stained with vanilla and butter, reminded me of baking cookies in her warm, sunny kitchen. It was bittersweet, a constant oscillation between the warmth of memory and the cold reality of my grief. Amidst the boxes and the dust, we found small pockets of joy. We discovered a hidden box of my grandfather's old vinyl records, and we spent an afternoon listening to Frank Sinatra dancing around the living room. We found my old report cards, which my grandmother had saved, each one covered in her proud, loopy handwriting. "That's my brilliant granddaughter." It was a powerful reminder that while most of my family saw me as a utility, she had seen me as a person to be cherished. As we worked, my phone remained blissfully silent. The lawyer's letter seemed to have done its job. My family had retreated, probably to plot their next move. The only contact I had was another phone call from Aunt Carol. It came on a Saturday afternoon while Liam and I were taking a break, eating sandwiches on the back porch. Her voice was cheerful, almost cloyingly so. "Just calling to check in, dear," she chirped. "How is the big clean-out going? You must be exhausted." "It's a lot of work, but we're getting there," I said, trying to keep my tone light. Liam caught my eye and gave me a subtle, "be careful" look. "I was just thinking about your grandmother's little writing desk," she said, her voice taking on that same casually specific tone as before. "The one in the guest bedroom. She kept all her important papers in there, didn't she? I remember she had some old savings bonds. You'll want to make sure you find those." "I'll keep an eye out for them," I said, a little knot of suspicion tightening in my stomach. Why was she so interested in the specifics? Why not just ask how it was going in general? It was another piece of the puzzle that didn't quite fit. "And be careful when you're there alone, Emma," she added, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You never know who might be watching. A house like that, people know an old woman lived there. It could be a target for thieves." At the time, I interpreted it as a genuine, if slightly paranoid, warning from an elderly woman. Liam, however, saw it differently. When I hung up, he looked at me, his expression serious. "She's not just gathering information anymore," he said slowly. "She's trying to plant ideas in your head. Thieves. Important papers. She's building a narrative, Emma. I don't know what it is, but it's not good." The peace of the day was shattered. Her words echoed in my head. A target for thieves. Suddenly, the quiet, empty house felt less like a sanctuary and more like a vulnerability. We made sure to double-check all the locks before we left that evening. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease, telling myself I was being paranoid. I was letting my family's toxicity poison my perception of everyone. I wanted to believe my aunt was just a concerned, slightly dotty old woman. But deep down, Liam's warning resonated with a terrible clarity. Aunt Carol wasn't a neutral party. She was an active player in this game. I just hadn't figured out what position she was playing yet. I was about to find out in the most dramatic and public way possible. The day it all came crashing down started like any other sorting day. It was a bright, clear Saturday morning. Liam and I arrived at my grandmother's house early, armed with coffee and donuts, ready to tackle the final and most emotionally charged room, her bedroom. This was her inner sanctum, the place where she slept, read, and dreamed. Everything in it was deeply personal. Her scent still lingered on the pillows. Her reading glasses were on the nightstand, next to a book lying open, as if she had just set it down. We worked in respectful silence for the first hour, carefully packing her clothes to be donated, wrapping her delicate perfume bottles in tissue paper. It was in the back of her closet, tucked away in a large hat box, that we found it. It was a thick manila envelope with my name written on it in her familiar, elegant script. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were two things. The first was a series of documents, the original deed to the house, clear and free, a list of her assets and accounts, all meticulously organized, and a handful of old, valuable stock certificates I hadn't known existed. The second was a letter. It was several pages long, written on her favorite lavender-scented stationery. "My dearest Emma," it began, "if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you are hopefully sitting in the peace and quiet of my home, a home that is now yours." I sank down onto the edge of the bed, Liam's hand a comforting weight on my shoulder, and I read her final words to me. She wrote about her love for me, about how proud she was of the woman I had become. She acknowledged the burden my family had placed on me, the unfairness of my role as the responsible one. "I have seen it all, my dear," she wrote. "I have seen how they treat you, how they take from you without thought or thanks. I am so sorry I could not shield you from it more. Know that my decisions in my will were not made lightly. They were made to give you a foundation, a place of safety and independence that you so richly deserve. This house is your fortress, Emma. Do not let them take it from you." Then came the part that made the blood run cold in my veins. "Be wary of your aunt," she wrote. "Carol has a good heart, I believe, but she is weak. She has always been easily swayed by your mother's theatrics and your father's bullying. She craves drama, and she will choose the side she perceives as having the most to offer her. She is not your ally. Trust your own strength." I looked up at Liam, my eyes wide with a mixture of grief, love, and a dawning, terrible understanding. My grandmother had seen it all. She had known. And she had tried to warn me. Before I could even fully process the weight of her words, we heard it. The sharp, official knock at the front door. We looked at each other, confused. I wasn't expecting a delivery. I walked out of the bedroom and down the hall, my grandmother's letter clutched in my hand. I peered through the peephole, and my stomach plummeted to the floor. Standing on my porch were 2 uniformed police officers, and behind them, looking pale and distraught, was my Aunt Carol. She met my eye through the distorted glass of the peephole, her expression a perfect mask of sorrow and concern. And in that moment all the pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The quiet period, the probing questions, the warning about thieves. It had all been a setup. This was her move. This was the checkmate. My hand hovered over the doorknob, my mind racing. Police. Why were the police here? Liam came up behind me, sensing my hesitation. "Who is it?" he whispered. "It's the police," I breathed, my voice barely audible. "And Aunt Carol." He peered over my shoulder, and his face hardened. "Okay," he said, his voice low and steady, pulling me back from the edge of panic. "Stay calm. We have nothing to hide. Let them in." I took a deep breath, unlocked the door, and opened it. The 2 officers were large and imposing on the small porch. One was older, with a greying mustache and weary eyes. The other was younger, with a stern, impassive face. Aunt Carol stood behind them, wringing her hands and avoiding my gaze. "Ma'am, are you Emma Parker?" the older officer asked, his voice polite but firm. "Yes, I am," I said, my heart hammering against my ribs. "We've received a call from this woman," he said, gesturing with his thumb toward my aunt. "She's concerned that a number of valuable items have been stolen from her deceased sister's home. She believes you may have been involved." I stared at him, then at my aunt, who finally looked up at me, her eyes brimming with manufactured tears. "I'm so sorry, Emma," she said, her voice trembling. "I didn't want to believe it. But when I called you, and you were so evasive about where everything was, I had to do something. It was a stunning performance." The concerned relative, forced to take drastic action against her own better judgment. Every word she spoke was a lie, a carefully crafted piece of theatre designed for an audience of 2 police officers. The evasive phone calls she mentioned were the ones where she had been interrogating me about the location of specific valuables. I was speechless. The sheer, calculated malice of it was breathtaking. "Stolen?" I finally managed to say, looking from her to the officers. "Nothing has been stolen. I am the executor of the estate. Everything is here, we've been taking inventory." The younger officer spoke up, his tone skeptical. "Stevens here has provided us with a list of specific items she says are missing." He held up a piece of paper. I could see my aunt's spidery handwriting on it. "She says these items were here last week but are now gone." Liam stepped forward, placing a reassuring hand on my back. He addressed the officers calmly and respectfully. "Officers, my name is Liam. I'm Miss Parker's fiancé. We have been here all morning, sorting through her grandmother's belongings. Nothing has been stolen. I assure you, there's been a misunderstanding." Aunt Carol let out a small theatrical sob. I saw it with my own eyes. She insisted, dabbing at her dry eyes with a tissue she'd produced from her sleeve. "I came by yesterday to drop off a casserole and I peeked in the window. I saw boxes, things being moved around, and I knew something was wrong. Another lie. She hadn't been here yesterday. We would have seen her." She was building her case, layering lie upon lie to create a plausible fiction. The older officer sighed. "Look, we don't want to be here any longer than we have to. Ma'am," he said to me, "if there's been a misunderstanding, The easiest way to clear it up is to allow us to come in and verify that the items on this list are, in fact, still on the premises. If they are, we'll be on our way. I felt a surge of indignation. They wanted to search my house, my grandmother's house, based on the fabrications of a woman I now knew was a pathological liar. But I also knew that refusing would make me look guilty. They had me in a corner. My grandmother's warning from her letter echoed in my mind. She is not your ally. I had a choice. I could let them in and prove my innocence, or I could refuse and escalate the situation into a legal battle I couldn't afford. Looking at my aunt's smug, tear-streaked face, I knew what I had to do. Of course, I said, my voice cold and steady. Come in, search anywhere you like. I stepped back, holding the door open wide. As the two officers and my weeping aunt crossed the threshold into my grandmother's home, I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were watching a scene from a movie. The house, my sanctuary, suddenly felt like a crime scene, and I was the primary suspect. The older officer, whose name was Miller, was professional and almost apologetic. The younger one, Officer Reed, was all business, his eyes scanning every room with suspicion. My aunt trailed behind them, pointing dramatically at empty spaces where she claimed items used to be. The silver tea set was always on that sideboard, she declared, pointing at the polished mahogany surface. It's gone. We packed it, Aunt Carol, I said, my voice tight. It's in a box, ready to be professionally cleaned and appraised. It's perfectly safe. Liam, ever the strategist, spoke up. Officers, if you'd like, we can show you our inventory. We've been photographing and cataloguing everything. The tea set is in that box right there, he said, pointing to a carefully labelled box by the fireplace. Box number 12, dining room silver. Officer Reed walked over to the box and looked at the label. He glanced at Officer Miller, who gave a slight nod. Okay, Reed said. What's next on the list? My sister's pearls, Aunt Carol exclaimed, moving toward the master bedroom. She never took them off. They were always in the little mother-of-pearl box on her dresser. They followed her into the bedroom. I felt a profound sense of violation as they stepped into that sacred space. I saw my grandmother's letter still lying on the bed where I had dropped it. For a moment, I was terrified they would try to read it, to take that last piece of her from me. But their focus was entirely on the task at hand. The box is empty, my aunt cried, holding up the small, iridescent box for the officers to see. She's taken them. I have not taken them, I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. I took them to the bank yesterday. They're in a safety deposit box, along with her other valuable jewelry and the stock certificates we found. It's the responsible thing to do as the executor. I saw a flicker of doubt in Officer Miller's eyes. He looked at my aunt, then back at me. Do you have a receipt from the bank? He asked. Yes, I do, I said. It's in my purse in the kitchen. I retrieved my purse, my hands shaking slightly, and pulled out the receipt from the bank, dated the previous afternoon. I handed it to him. He examined it, his expression unreadable. Liam, meanwhile, had opened his laptop on the dining room table and pulled up the spreadsheet. Here you go, officers, he said, turning the screen toward them. As you can see, we have a complete inventory. Here's the entry for the pearl necklace, with a photo, and a note that it was moved to a safety deposit box on this date. Officer Reed looked at the spreadsheet, then at the receipt in Miller's hand, then back at Aunt Carol, whose performance was starting to falter. The tears had stopped, and her expression was hardening into one of frustration. Her plan was not going as smoothly as she had anticipated. They went through the rest of her list, item by item. The grandfather clock, right there in the hall. The first edition books, safely on the shelves in the study. The porcelain dolls, undisturbed in their glass cabinet. With each item they found exactly where it was supposed to be. My aunt's story grew thinner and more transparent. She had overplayed her hand. She had assumed I would be a disorganized, emotional wreck, easy to intimidate. She had not counted on Liam's methodical planning. She had not counted on my quiet competence. And she had certainly not counted on the fact that I had a receipt from the bank. The atmosphere in the house shifted. The officer's initial suspicion toward me was slowly but surely transferring to my aunt. They were no longer looking at me as a potential thief. They were looking at her as a potential liar. The final item on Aunt Carol's list was the collection of antique silverware, my great-grandmother's wedding set. She insisted it had been in the top drawer of the kitchen cabinet, a place she claimed to have checked just 2 days ago. Her voice was becoming shrill, her accusations more desperate. "It was right here," she insisted, pulling the drawer open to reveal an assortment of everyday cutlery. "It's been stolen and replaced with this cheap stuff." Liam, bless his calm and organized heart, simply pointed to another labeled box in the corner of the kitchen. "That would be in box 24, kitchen heirlooms," he said, his voice dripping with polite patience. "We packed it up this morning. We were concerned about tarnish." Officer Reed walked over, lifted the lid, and peered inside. The ornate, tarnished silver gleamed dully up at him from its nest of tissue paper. He closed the box and turned to face my aunt. His expression was no longer one of professional detachment. He looked annoyed. "Ma'am," Officer Miller said, his voice heavy with weary authority. "Everything on your list is here. It's accounted for and safely packed away. There has been no theft." The silence that followed was thick and suffocating. My aunt's face, which had been a mask of feigned grief, was now pale with fury. Her plan, so brilliantly malicious in its conception, had crumbled to dust around her. She had failed to intimidate me. She had failed to create a legal pretext for seizing the assets. All she had managed to do was waste the time of 2 police officers and reveal her own venomous nature. She could have moved them back. Aunt Carol sputtered, pointing a trembling finger at me. "She could have known I was coming. She's a liar." Officer Miller held up a hand, cutting her off. "That's enough, Miss Stevens. We're done here." He then turned to me, his gaze direct, and, for the first time, truly apologetic. "Ms. Parker, I am sorry for the intrusion. We have to follow up on every call we receive. It's clear to us that you are handling your grandmother's estate in a responsible and organized manner." A wave of relief so powerful, it almost made my knees buckle washed over me. It was over. I had been vindicated. But as I looked at my aunt's face, contorted with impotent rage, the relief was quickly replaced by a cold, hard anger. This woman had put me through hell. She had seeked the police on me. She had tried to have me arrested, to brand me as a criminal, all in the service of my toxic family's greed. I was not going to let her walk away from this, thinking there were no consequences. As the officers began to move toward the door, I spoke, my voice ringing with a newfound authority. "Officers, before you go," I said, "I think you need to be aware of the full context here." I walked over to the dining room table and picked up the binder of evidence Liam and I had so carefully compiled. "My family has been harassing me for weeks, ever since my grandmother's will was read. I have here dozens of abusive text messages. I have a log of intimidating phone calls. I have a copy of a letter from their lawyer, threatening to sue me based on false allegations." I opened the binder and showed them the pages. They looked at the evidence, their expressions growing more serious. "This visit today," I continued, my voice steady and strong, "was not born out of genuine concern. It was a malicious act. It was an attempt to use the police to harass and intimidate me. It was the filing of a false police report." Officer Miller's eyes narrowed as he looked at Aunt Carol. The legal term false police report hung in the air, heavy and dangerous. My aunt seemed to shrink in on herself. The master manipulator was suddenly a small, old woman who had been caught in a web of her own making. She had wanted drama, and now she was about to get more than she had ever bargained for. A tense silence descended upon the room as the weight of my accusation settled. The phrase false police report had an immediate and chilling effect. Aunt Carol, who had been sputtering with indignation moments before, went completely still. The colour drained from her face, leaving it a pasty, mottled grey. She looked like a cornered animal. Officer Miller exchanged a long, meaningful look with his partner. He then turned his full attention to my aunt, his folksy demeanour gone, replaced by a stern, official presence. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low and serious, "is what she's saying true? Have you and your family been in a dispute over this estate?" My aunt opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She just stared at him, her eyes wide with panic. "Did you knowingly provide us with information that you believe to be false for the purpose of initiating a police investigation?" Officer Reed added, his tone sharp and accusatory, "because that is a serious offence." It's a waste of police resources, and it can have severe legal consequences. Aunt Carol began to tremble, her carefully constructed facade of the concerned relative completely shattered. She was no longer a performer in a play, she was a suspect in an interrogation. She stammered, trying to piece together a defense. "No, I was just worried," she said, her voice a weak, reedy whisper. I really thought things were missing." It was a pathetic attempt to backtrack, and nobody in the room was buying it. Her earlier theatrics, her dramatic pronouncements of theft, her detailed list, it all pointed to a premeditated act, not a simple misunderstanding. I pressed my advantage. "She wasn't worried," I said, my voice cutting and clear. "She was acting on behalf of my parents and my sister. This was their latest tactic after legal threats and verbal harassment failed. She called me multiple times over the last 2 weeks, asking very specific questions about where I was keeping these exact items. She wasn't checking on my welfare. She was gathering intelligence to build this false claim." I saw Officer Miller's jaw tighten. He was a man who clearly did not appreciate being used as a pawn in a petty family squabble. He took a step closer to my aunt, who flinched as if he were about to strike her. "Miss Stevens," he said, his voice dangerously quiet, "I am going to give you one opportunity to be completely honest with me. Did you file this report as part of an ongoing family dispute?" My aunt looked from the officer to me, then to Liam. She was trapped. Every exit was blocked. She finally broke, her shoulders slumping in defeat. A single, genuine tear, a tear of self-pity, rolled down her wrinkled cheek. "They put me up to it," she whispered, her voice cracking. "My niece. Her mother." She said Emma was being unreasonable. "They just wanted to scare her a little, to make her see sense." It was a confession, a full and complete admission of guilt. She had confessed to conspiracy. She had confessed to filing a false police report. She had thrown my mother and the rest of the family under the bus in a desperate attempt to save herself. A grim, bitter smile touched my lips. My grandmother had been right. Aunt Carol was weak. She had chosen the side she thought was strongest, but the moment that side began to crumble, she switched her allegiance without a second thought, sacrificing them to protect herself. The game was over, and I had won. But the victory felt hollow, tainted by the ugliness of it all. I had not just exposed a liar. I had ripped the final, tattered veil off my family's dysfunction, revealing the rotten core underneath for all to see. Officer Miller let out a long, slow breath, the sound of a man whose patience had officially run out. He looked at my aunt with a mixture of pity and disgust. "Ma'am, you've put yourself in a very difficult position," he said. He turned to me. "Miss Parker, do you want to press charges?" The question hung in the air, a sudden and immense weight. Press charges. I had the power, right there and then, to have my own aunt arrested. I could see the path unfurling before me. Court dates, restraining orders, a complete and total legal severing. A part of me, the part that had been trampled on for years, screamed for retribution. I wanted to see her face the consequences. I wanted my parents and Chloe to know that their actions had led to this, that their manipulation had a real-world cost. But as I looked at Aunt Carol, a frail, trembling old woman who had been twisted by my mother's bitterness and her own moral weakness, I didn't feel vengeful. I just felt tired. Tired of the drama, tired of the fighting, tired of the poison that had infected my family for generations. "No," I said, the word coming out quieter than I expected. "I don't want to press charges." A visible wave of relief washed over my aunt. Officer Miller nodded, as if he had expected this answer. "But," I continued, my voice growing stronger, my resolve hardening, "I want her to understand, and I want my parents and my sister to understand that this is the end, this is the last time. There will be no more phone calls, no more letters, no more surprise visits. Any further attempt to contact me or to interfere with this estate will be met with immediate legal action. And then I will press charges." I looked directly at my aunt, making sure she saw the absolute finality in my eyes. "Do you understand, Aunt Carol? You need to go home and you need to tell them. Tell them it's over. Tell them they have lost." My aunt could only nod, her eyes wide and fearful. "As for you, Miss Stevens," Officer Miller said, turning back to her, "we won't be charging you today. but we are filing a formal report on this incident. Any future calls from you regarding this address or this family will be viewed with extreme prejudice. Do you understand me? You have used up all of your credibility with our department. Go home." He and Officer Reed escorted her to the door. She scurried out without a backward glance, a disgraced soldier fleeing a lost battle. The officers paused on the porch. Officer Miller turned back to me one last time. "My advice," he said, his voice kind, "is to get a good lawyer and a restraining order. People like this, they don't always learn their lesson the first time." And then they were gone. The front door clicked shut, leaving Liam and me standing in the sudden, profound silence of the hallway. The adrenaline that had been coursing through my veins for the past hour drained away, leaving me feeling shaky and hollow. Liam wrapped his arms around me, holding me tightly as I began to tremble. I buried my face in his chest and finally allowed myself to cry. I cried for my grandmother. I cried for the family I should have had. And I cried for the person I used to be. The girl who would have done anything to keep the peace. The girl who was now gone forever, replaced by someone stronger. Someone who had stared into the abyss of her family's toxicity and had not backed down. The aftermath of the police incident was a strange and unsettling quiet. It was as if a massive storm had finally passed, leaving behind a landscape that was both devastated and cleansed. My phone, which had been a source of constant anxiety for weeks, remained silent. There were no angry texts from Chloe, no manipulative calls from my mother, no blustering demands from my father. And, of course, there was nothing from Aunt Carol. The message had been delivered. The war was over. Liam and I took Officer Miller's advice to heart. The following Monday, I was back in Mr. Davies' office, recounting the entire sordid affair. He listened with a grim expression, his fingers steepled under his chin. When I finished, he didn't seem surprised. "In my line of work," he said with a sigh, "I find that there is very little that people will not do for money or out of spite. Often, it's a combination of the two." He agreed that a formal cease and desist letter was the next logical step. He drafted a formidable document addressed to my parents, my sister, and my aunt. It laid out the events in stark, uncompromising detail: the initial harassment, the baseless legal threats, and the filing of a false police report. It stated in no uncertain terms that any further contact, whether direct or indirect, would be considered harassment and would result in an immediate application for a restraining order and potential civil action. We sent the letters via certified mail, requiring a signature upon receipt. There was a certain satisfaction in knowing that they would each have to hold that letter in their hands and confront, in black and white, the consequences of their behavior. One by one, over the next few days, the signed receipts came back to Mr. Davies' office. They had received the message. The silence was no longer a temporary ceasefire. It was a formal, legally binding surrender. With the threat of my family removed, a great weight lifted from my shoulders. Liam and I were able to return to my grandmother's house, not with a sense of dread, but with a sense of purpose. We were no longer just sorting through an estate, we were reclaiming a sanctuary. The work became a form of therapy. Cleaning out the closets felt like cleaning out the cobwebs in my own mind. Organizing the drawers felt like putting my own life in order. With every box we packed and every surface we polished, we were erasing the toxic residue of the conflict and allowing the peaceful spirit of my grandmother to return. We found more treasures as we went. We discovered a collection of her journals from when she was a young woman, filled with her hopes and dreams. I read about her falling in love with my grandfather, her excitement about becoming a mother, her worries and her triumphs. It was like meeting her all over again, not as my grandmother, but as a person in her own right. In the back of a cedar chest, beneath a pile of hand-knitted blankets, I found a small, beautifully carved wooden box. Inside was a single, perfect photograph of me as a little girl, sitting on my grandmother's lap. Tucked behind the photo was a small, folded note. It was not a long letter like the other one. It contained only a single sentence, written in her familiar, loving hand. "You were always the strong one because you had to be," it read. "Now, be strong for yourself." Permission slip. It was a release from a lifetime of obligation. My strength no longer belonged to my family, to be used and exploited for their benefit. It was mine, and I was finally ready to use it for myself. With the legal fortifications in place, a new kind of normal began to settle in. Liam and I spent our weekends at the house, slowly transforming it from a museum of the past into a home for our future. We painted the walls a warm, sunny yellow, my grandmother's favorite color. We cleared out the overgrown garden, planting new flowers and a small vegetable patch. We made plans to turn the small guest room, the one with the writing desk Aunt Carol had been so interested in, into a home office for me. Each change felt significant, a declaration that we were moving forward. We kept the pieces of furniture that held meaning, the floral armchair, the grandfather clock, the sturdy oak dining table, and we sold or donated the rest. The process was liberating. I was not erasing my grandmother's memory. I was curating it, choosing to be surrounded by the things that brought joy and peace, rather than a sense of suffocating obligation. The house began to breathe again. It filled with our laughter, the smell of fresh paint and baking bread, the sound of music playing on the old record player. The ghosts of my family's greed and anger were banished, replaced by a palpable sense of hope. One afternoon, about a month after the incident, I was sorting through the last few boxes in the study. I came across a box labeled Finances. Inside, among old tax returns and bank statements, I found a small leather-bound ledger. It was my grandmother's household expense book from the last 10 years. Being a meticulous record keeper, she had noted down every penny she spent, but she had also noted down every loan she had given. My eyes scanned the pages, and my breath caught in my throat. It was all there, in her neat, precise script. Loan to Chloe for business venture, 5, 0. Loan to mother's name for emergency credit card debt, 3, 0. Loan to father's name for car repair, 500. The list went on and on. It was a secret history of my family's financial irresponsibility and my grandmother's quiet, and I now realized, enabling generosity. She had been their bank long before I was. But there was another column next to the amounts. It was labeled repaid, and next to every single loan she had given to my parents and my sister, the entry was the same, a stark, empty 0. Then I saw another section. It was for loans she had given to me. I remembered them vaguely, a few $100s for textbooks in college, $1,000 to help with the security deposit on my first apartment. And next to each loan I had taken, in the repaid column, she had written paid in full, followed by the date I had paid her back. But there was more. Below that, she had made another note. All assistance Emma has provided for my care, groceries, transport, co-pays, from 2000 and 22,022. Estimated value, a number that made me gasp. Repaid in full by my love and the inheritance of my home. It was a final, stunning vindication. It was proof. She hadn't left me the house out of sentiment alone. She had seen it as a transaction, a repayment for a debt of care and love that my parents and sister had never been willing to pay. They had not been disinherited out of spite. They had been given exactly what they had earned. 0. This ledger was a powerful weapon. In a court of law, it would have been irrefutable evidence against any claim of undue influence. It showed a clear, long-term pattern of my financial responsibility versus their financial parasitism. But I didn't need to use it in court. Its power was for me alone. It was the final piece of the puzzle, the ultimate validation that my actions had been right, that my grandmother's wishes had been just, and that my conscience was clear. I closed the ledger, a sense of profound peace settling over me. I didn't need to fight anymore. The truth had set me free. Several months passed. The seasons changed. Autumn leaves littered the lawn of my grandmother's Snow-My house. Liam and I had fully moved in, our lives seamlessly blending into the spaces that had once belonged to my grandparents. The silence from my family was absolute. It was as if they had fallen off the face of the earth. I knew, through the grapevine of more distant relatives, that they were not happy. The story that they told was that I, in my greed, had stolen the family home and then, in my cruelty, had cut them all off. I was painted as the villain, the cold-hearted monster who had torn a loving family apart. In the past, this would have destroyed me. I would have been consumed with the need to defend myself, to set the record straight, but now, I simply didn't care. Their opinions were irrelevant. The people who mattered, Liam, my close friends, the few sane relatives I still had contact with, knew the truth. And that was enough. The first crack in the wall of silence came in the form of a birthday card. It was for my birthday, and it was from Aunt Carol. It arrived in a plain white envelope, her spidery handwriting instantly recognizable. I held it for a long time, half tempted to throw it straight into the recycling bin. Liam saw me looking at it. "You don't have to open it," he said, but I was curious. What could she possibly have to say? I slit the envelope open. Inside was a generic flower-covered card. The pre-printed message read, "Wishing you a wonderful day." Below it, she had written a short, simple message. "Thinking of you. I hope you are well. Love, Aunt Carol." There was no apology. There was no acknowledgement of the trauma she had caused. There was no mention of the police, the lies, or the harassment. It was a classic move from the manipulator's playbook: pretend nothing ever happened and try to slowly, quietly re-establish contact. It was a test, a little probe sent out to see if the defenses were still up. If I had responded, even with an angry message, it would have been an invitation for more communication. It would have told her that the door was still open, even a tiny crack. I took the card, walked into the kitchen, and dropped it into the trash can. I did not respond. I did not acknowledge it. I gave her nothing. A week later, another probe arrived. This time it was an email from my mother. The subject line was "just checking in." The message was brief and cloyingly sweet. It said she had heard from Carol that I was well, and that she was so glad. It said she missed me and that she hoped we could talk one day. It was another attempt to rewrite history, to gloss over the ugliness with a veneer of maternal concern. It was bait, and I was not biting. I created a new folder in my email account. I named it Evidence. I moved her email into it, unread, and then I blocked her email address. I was no longer a participant in their drama. I was an archivist of their dysfunction. Liam and I were building a life of peace, a life based on mutual respect, honesty, and love. The foundation was my grandmother's house, but the architecture was all ours. We were strong for ourselves, and we were strong for each other. The contrast between the life we were building and the toxic swamp I had escaped from could not have been more stark. I had been living in a demolition derby my entire life, constantly bracing for the next impact. Now, I was finally out of the car, standing on solid ground, and the noise of the crashing and smashing was finally beginning to fade into the distance. The holidays were always the most difficult time of year with my family. They were a pressure cooker of forced cheerfulness, unspoken resentments, and inevitable explosions. Thanksgiving and Christmas were command performances where I was expected to play my part as the dutiful daughter and sister, usually while bankrolling a significant portion of the festivities. As our first holiday season in the new house approached, I felt a sense of trepidation. It was a Pavlovian response, my body tensing in anticipation of a conflict that was no longer coming. Liam noticed it. "You're worried they're going to try something, aren't you?" he asked one evening as we were putting up Christmas lights on the front porch. "I'm worried they'll try to ruin it," I admitted. "They always did." "They can't ruin it unless you let them," he said, handing me a string of lights. "This is our home now, we make the rules." He was right. We decided to host our own Thanksgiving, a small gathering for friends who, like us, had complicated family situations. We called it Orphans' Thanksgiving. The day was filled with laughter, good food, and genuine affection. There was no drama, no walking on eggshells, no passive-aggressive comments about the dryness of the turkey. It was peaceful, it was joyful, it was everything a holiday should be. In the middle of dinner, I received a text message from a number I didn't recognize. "We're all thinking of you today. Mom made your favorite pie. It's not the same without you." I knew instantly it was from Chloe. It was a pathetic attempt at a guilt trip, a little hand grenade of emotional manipulation lobbed from afar. I showed the text to Liam. He read it and shook his head. "Don't even think about it," he said. I smiled. "I'm not." I deleted the text without replying and went back to my friends. The attempted intrusion had no power over me. It was like a mosquito buzzing on the other side of a window screen. I could hear it, but it couldn't touch me. The real test came a week before Christmas. A large package arrived on the porch, addressed to me. The return address was my parents' house. My first instinct was to refuse delivery, to write "return to sender" on it, and send it right back. But again, curiosity got the better of me. Liam and I brought the heavy box inside and placed it on the kitchen table, regarding it with the suspicion usually reserved for a ticking bomb. We opened it carefully. Inside was a bizarre assortment of items. There was a cheap, garishly decorated Christmas sweater. There was a photo album, but it was filled with pictures only of Chloe, from her baby photos to her most recent influencer-style headshots. Tucked inside the album was a letter from my mother. It was a long, rambling, self-pitying screed about how I had abandoned them, how heartbroken they were, and how they were praying I would come to my senses and return to the family. She wrote about how Chloe missed her big sister, how she cried herself to sleep at night. It was a work of fiction so audacious it was almost impressive. But the most bizarre item was at the bottom of the box. It was a single, artisanal candle. It was from Chloe's failed candle-making business, the one I had funded with my savings. I picked it up. It had been used. The wick was blackened and the wax was melted down about an inch. They had sent me a used candle, a literal relic of their financial exploitation of me, as a Christmas present. I started to laugh. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was a dry, dark, incredulous laugh. The sheer, unmitigated gall of it all was absurd. They weren't just clueless. They were operating in a different reality, one in which their terrible behavior could be erased by a used candle and a book of lies. This package wasn't an olive branch. It was a final, desperate attempt to assert their narrative, to pretend that they were the loving, wronged family, and I was the prodigal daughter who had lost her way. It was the last gasp of their control. Staring at the contents of the box, the shrine to my sister, the self-pitying letter, the used candle, I didn't feel anger or sadness. I felt nothing but a profound sense of detachment. It was like looking at artifacts from a lost civilization, one whose customs were both baffling and pathetic. These people were strangers to me now, their motivations and actions completely alien. Liam looked at me, a concerned expression on his face. "Are you okay?" "I'm better than okay," I said, a slow smile spreading across my face. "I'm free." This box, this pathetic collection of emotional manipulation tools, was the greatest gift they could have ever given me. It was the final, irrefutable proof that I had made the right decision. There was no reasoning with people like this. There was no compromise. The only winning move was not to play. We took the photo album of Chloe and the used candle and we threw them in the trash. We donated the ugly sweater to a charity clothing drive. I took my mother's letter and my grandmother's ledger, and I filed them away together in a box labeled "The Past." I didn't need them for evidence anymore. I kept them as a reminder, a historical record of the life I had escaped. That Christmas was the best of my life. Liam and I spent it quietly, just the two of us. We woke up late, we drank hot chocolate by the fire, we listened to old records, and we talked about our future. We talked about getting a dog. We talked about the wedding we were planning, a small, intimate affair with only our closest friends. We talked about building a life so full of love and peace that it would leave no room for the ghosts of the past. In the new year, I made a final, symbolic change. I had been going by my full name, Emma Parker, my entire life. Parker was my father's name. It was a name I no longer felt any connection to. I went through the legal process of changing my last name to my grandmother's maiden name, Wallace. It was a name that represented strength, love, and resilience. Emma Wallace. It felt right. It felt like me. It was a final act of reclaiming my identity. I was no longer defined by my relationship to my parents or my sister. I was not the family scapegoat. I was not the responsible one. I was not the family bank. I was my grandmother's granddaughter. I was Liam's partner. And most importantly, I was myself, whole and complete. A few weeks later, I received a notification on a social media platform I rarely used. It was a friend request from a name I didn't recognize. I clicked on it, and my blood ran cold. It was Chloe, but she was using a fake name. Her profile picture was a heavily filtered selfie, but it was unmistakably her. She was trying to breach the wall. She was trying to find a way back in, to spy on the life I had built without her. I stared at the request for a long moment. The old Emma would have been terrified, or maybe even tempted to accept, just to see what she was up to. But the new Emma, Emma Wallace, felt nothing but a weary sense of pity. I clicked deny. Then I clicked block. The wall would hold. Life continued, blessedly peaceful and wonderfully mundane. Liam and I adopted a scruffy terrier mix from a local shelter and named him Wallace. He filled the quiet corners of the house with the happy sounds of clicking claws and contented sighs. We set a date for our wedding, a simple ceremony to be held in the backyard garden that we had so lovingly restored. My life was full. My work at the veterinary clinic was rewarding, my home was a sanctuary, and my relationship with Liam was the bedrock on which everything else was built. One day, I ran into a distant cousin at the grocery store. She was on my mother's side of the family, a woman I hadn't seen in years. She looked at me with an expression of deep pity. "Oh, Emma," she said, her voice hushed. "I was so sorry to hear about you and your family. Your mother is just devastated." I braced myself for a lecture, for an appeal to be the bigger person and reconcile. But I decided I was done being polite and silent. "My mother is devastated that she no longer has access to my bank account and my emotional labor," I said, my voice calm and even. "I, on the other hand, have never been happier." My cousin was so taken aback by my directness that she was rendered speechless. She just stammered something about needing to get her frozen peas and scurried away. It was a small moment, but it was a significant one. I had spoken my truth without apology or fear. The narrative they were trying to sell to the world no longer had any power over me. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place about a year after the police incident. I received a letter from Mr. Davies, my lawyer. He was retiring and was closing out his old files. Included in the letter was a final invoice, which had long since been paid, and a copy of a document for my records. It was a copy of the police report from that fateful day. I had never seen the full report before. I sat down at my kitchen table, the sun streaming in, and I read it. It detailed the initial call from a concerned citizen, Miss Carol Stevens. It listed the items she had claimed were stolen. It documented the officer's search of the property, and it documented their conclusion. No evidence of theft, all items accounted for. It is the reporting officer's opinion that this call was placed not out of genuine concern, but as a tactic in an ongoing civil dispute. Complainant, Mrs. Carol Stevens, was cautioned regarding the filing of false reports. But it was the supplementary report, filed by Officer Miller, that made me stop breathing for a moment. He had done some follow-up. He had run a simple background check on my aunt, and he had discovered that she had a history. 20 years prior, she had been involved in a bitter dispute with a neighbor over a property line. The dispute had escalated, and she had been formally warned by the police for making harassing phone calls. 10 years before that, she had been a party in a contested will, her own mother's, where she had made accusations of misconduct against her own brother. It hadn't just been my mother's influence. My grandmother had been right when she'd said Carol craved drama. It was a pattern. She was a pot stirrer, a chaos agent, someone who thrived on conflict and inserted herself into situations where she didn't belong. She had done it her whole life. This wasn't just about my family's greed. This was about my aunt's own pathology. She hadn't just been a soldier in my mother's army. She had been a willing and experienced mercenary, enjoying the battle for its own sake. Reading that report, I finally understood. It wasn't my fault. None of it. I had not caused their dysfunction. I had simply been born into it. My only crime had been to finally refuse to be a victim of it, and in refusing, I had saved myself. Today, my life is unrecognizable from what it was just a few short years ago. The house that was once a battleground is now a home filled with love, laughter, and the gentle snores of a happy dog. The garden is thriving. Liam and I were married there last spring, surrounded by a small group of people who genuinely love and support us. There were no dramatic confrontations, no hidden agendas, just joy. I never heard from my parents or my sister again after blocking them. Their silence is a gift I appreciate every single day. As for Aunt Carol, I heard through the family grapevine that she had tried to stir up drama in another cousin's life and had been swiftly and publicly shut down. It seems her reputation finally caught up with her. The peace I have is not something I was given, it is something I fought for. I learned that family is not an obligation to endure abuse. I learned that my own well-being matters more than keeping a toxic peace. And I learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to walk away. My grandmother's letter, the one that warned me about my aunt, is framed and sits on my desk. Her words, "This house is your fortress, Emma. Do not let them take it from you," became my mantra. I did not let them take it. I defended it, I cleansed it, and I built a beautiful life within its walls. I am no longer the family scapegoat or the designated shock absorber. I am Emma Wallace, a veterinary technician, a wife, a dog mom, and a happy, peaceful woman. My strength is finally my own. I did what I had to do to survive and to thrive. I cut off the rotten parts of my family tree to save myself. So, I have to ask, after everything they put me through, was I right to cut them off completely, or should I have left a door open for a reconciliation that would likely never come? Let me know what you think.